distinct pleasure this evening to be hosting this debate on environmental issues under the auspices of GreenPAC, an organization that, among other things, are organizing 100 debates about the environment across Canada tonight and tomorrow night, and co-hosting with able assistance from Ecology Ottawa. I'll just start introducing how we're going to be set up tonight and go back to the candidates once we all have them and explain a few of the ground rules around timing, etc. I'd like to start with a couple of acknowledgements. The first one, I think we'll all agree, is that the environment is foundational. Recently, after the publication of the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, UN Secretary General Guterres said that it's now code red for the planet. Recently, incoming Governor General Mary Simon said that the climate is foundational. I think those two quotes set the mood and sort of set the scene for the discussion. The discussion tonight is taking place on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabeg territory. It's the duty of our elected representatives and of all Canadians to ensure that we have right relations with our Indigenous people. I'd like to acknowledge people all working on this evening, people at Ecology Ottawa. You'll see Rob Barnes on the line, and other helpers from Ecology Ottawa, and people ably assisting from First Unitarian Congregation of this evening, Guy Belparish, who will be doing the timing, and other helpers who are assisting with the Zoom. There's going to be a series of 8 questions. I don't believe the candidates have seen the questions, and they will be randomly assigned. So I've set up a random assignment table with a set amount of time for answers. And after that, we'll go to questions from the audience. So if you can think of questions, you can start putting them in Q&A. I think, you might want to wait till towards the end of the questions that have been preset, just so it's not redundant. But we do have somebody who will keep watching the Q&A, keep looking at all the questions, and if there's a common theme to the question, bunch them so that we're doing a more masterful job of putting questions to the candidates. Also just mention, although this is an English language debate, we are in a bilingual country. S'il y a une question en français, je poserai la question en français et en anglais également. And so the question will be asked in French and English if it comes in French, and it'll be up to the candidates to decide in which official language they wish to respond. So with that, I'd like to introduce the candidates this evening, and I'll do them in the random order that I've set up in a random order table. I don't know if people can see that, but that's a random order table. Very, very scientific. Drew names from a hat. Random order will be used for introductions and asking of questions. So it's randomized, and there'll be a set number of people going first and last, so that somebody's not always first and last. So in the random order, please allow me to introduce David Yeo from the People's Party of Canada, Anita Vandenbeld from the Liberal Party, Yavar Hameed from the New Democratic Party, and David Stibbe from the Green Party.
Mike, David Yeo does not seem to have been able to rejoin us. He's not on the call right now.
Okay. There's a new Isaac Smith.
Oh, maybe.
Okay. So it does appear that David Yeo, unfortunately, has been having some technical difficulty joining us. I'll give that a few more minutes. Yeah, this is our life for the past 18 months of being on Zoom. Still, after all this time, things running on schedule is so, right? So we'll just wait that out. So please bear with us.
And Mike, the other thing that we wanted to mention was that in addition to the candidates appearing tonight, there were 2 other candidates who were also invited to attend. They chose not to.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yes. So all candidates were invited this evening, and the continued that you're seeing reflects those who wish to join the debate. So I'll also mention that as we pose questions, we'll put them into the chat. So it can help both the audience and, of course, the candidates. If they're not answering the question first, they can see the question that they're going to be asked to answer. So we got,
unfortunately, while we're seeing David's name, I'm not seeing even an icon for a microphone, and his video remains off. So I think he's having some significant issues with his equipment.
Okay. So I think we're going to have to get going. We can, if we can make contact with David Yeo, we'll start slotting him in wherever we are in the process of asking questions. But also have to attempt to respect people's time. So I'm going to get things rolling. And so each of the candidates, you are going to have a minute to introduce yourselves. So introduce your party and a brief introduction. I should mention that he is the timer, and we're doing strict timing. Strict is fair. And so a minute, if you can stopwatch yourselves, you'll get about a 2-second warning, and then you're off. So Anita, with no further ado, I'll let you go ahead, and your minute starts now.
Thank you. Our planet is in a climate crisis, and our Liberal government is not only on track to meet, but to exceed our Paris targets. And so we set even more ambitious targets. And we're the only party that has a detailed plan on how we're going to get there. That plan includes making sure families can buy electric vehicles or retrofit their homes. It includes green infrastructure and innovation, and making sure we're investing in clean technology. It includes public transit and active transportation. It includes nature-based solutions like the wetlands near the D&D campus that we were able to restore. It also includes conserving our oceans, our fresh water, and our land, just like here at Mud Lake. We also are going to be moving forward on labeling harmful and toxic substances, on eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, reducing methane emissions, eliminating thermal coal, and banning plastic pollution. We have the plan that has been reviewed by Climate Law and found to be the best one of all the parties. Thank you.
Okay, next, Yavar. You have 1 minute. Go ahead.
Good evening. No conversation about sustainability can take place without acknowledging the need to respect and work with Indigenous land defenders. So in these discussions tonight, we cannot forget that we're meeting on their land, unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. In the last 5 years, West-Nepean has seen 2 floods, a tornado, and wildfire smoke hanging over our city, endangering our homes, cutting our power, and polluting our air. We all know we need action. So tonight, I'm excited about the NDP's plan to meet the targets that would keep global warming to 1.5 degrees, and Jagmeet Singh's commitment to immediately canceling fossil fuel subsidies. A 1% tax on wealth over 20 million will allow us to invest more than 70 billion over the next decade to fight for our climate future. In this debate, I welcome the opportunity to address climate justice and to represent the NDP's bold vision for Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, David Stibbe, if you could go. Dave, excuse me.
Hi, my name is David Stibbe. I am the federal candidate for the Green Party in Ottawa West-Nepean, and I'm running to be your advocate to make environmental concerns and issues equal in status to the economy, healthcare, justice, and equality. I've spent my lifetime exploring the wilderness and educating others about the environment. As well, during my 20 years as an educator and teacher, having worked with children and young adults in grade school, middle school, high school, and college, I can tell you that our next generation is afraid of what the future holds. When my own students called my environmental science class environmental depression class, I realized I had to show them that we need to get involved in politics to advocate for the change we need. It is truly time we vote for a party that will hold true to its core beliefs. If we continue to always vote for red, blue, or orange, we will just continue to repeat the mistakes that brought us here. Please vote for me in the next election. Please vote green. I promise you my values will not change, unlike some of the other parties, if I am chosen to represent our riding in Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. And David Yeo, you have a minute for a brief introduction and opening comments, starting now.
That's great. Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. Appreciate that. And welcome to all the other candidates. I appreciate the time tonight. And of course, all of the people listening here and abroad. David Yeo, I'm the Ottawa West candidate for Ottawa West-Nepean for the People's Party of Canada. First and foremost, like Yavar, this is unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. And my great-grandfather actually signed the treaties with the colonials 98 years ago. Ojibwe is my heritage, and I do have a lot of my family still on the reserve in Alderville First Nation. Chief Robert Franklin actually signed the treaties 98 years ago, and at that point, he was instilling and crossing over to the colonials the actual responsibility for looking after the environment. And we kind of know how that's kind of working out. So, you know, I'm taking this opportunity to leave what I normally do during the day to come into this forum and actually bring a resonant answer to what are the problems are in the actual climate.
Sorry, David, I have to call time.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we'll get to all the rest of it here shortly.
Great. Okay, thank you for the introductions. So I'm ready to ask our first question, and it'll be asked in order to Anita, Yavar, David Stibbe, and David Yeo. So the question is, the way we heat our buildings is a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions. In Ottawa, we know that building heating accounts for almost half of greenhouse gas emissions, mostly from natural gas consumption. If you were elected as an MP, what would you do to address emissions which come from heating our buildings across the community? So Anita, that's with you. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much for that question. And that is absolutely correct. And this is exactly why, as part of our climate strategy, we are providing funding to municipalities so that they can actually reduce emissions in buildings, in public buildings, but also federal government. We have set targets to make sure that federal government buildings are using clean energy and are reducing emissions by 30%. But one of the things you can actually see here in the riding, for instance, is we built affordable seniors housing. We provided funding, and Ottawa Community Housing has built it just off of Merivale Road. And in the winter, each independent unit only costs $27 a month to heat because it was built with those environmental standards. I think one of the things that we need to do and are doing is making sure that our infrastructure funding is linked to making sure that we are building buildings that are net zero and that are using low carbon. We also need to help families, and that's why we have the home retrofit program, so that families can make sure that they're reducing their emissions in their homes as well. And also making sure that when we're working with communities that are at risk, we've been able to work with Nepean Housing, where we provided funding to retrofit a lot of the public housing in the riding, especially in Draffin Court, where we replaced the windows to make sure that those homes are more energy efficient. So this is all part of our plan. It is something that we are already doing, and it's something that we need to absolutely continue. Thank you.
Okay, Yavar.
So the NDP plan is an intersectional plan. So when we talk about housing, when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about education, these things all have a green element in it. And so one of the things that some of you who've seen the plan, you know we talk about 500,000 housing units over the next 10 years. So those housing units are not only going to be affordable housing units, but they will also be greenhousing units. So we're talking about green jobs, we're talking about retrofitting, and we're conscious of in that process of retrofitting, in bringing that green infrastructure, we know that energy efficiency is going to be a priority, and the NDP plan is also designed to take away those subsidies to large fossil fuel companies, so that the $58 billion that have been amassed by those large emitters is going to be actually taxed, so we can use that, we can put that money into the kind of programming that is going to promote energy efficiency. And we're going to think about it not only generally speaking with respect to the infrastructure, but through the Office of Environmental Justice, we're going to be concerned about those groups, those marginalized groups within society that bear disproportionate burden, single income
Call time on you, Yavar. Thank you.
Great. Dave Stibbe, it's your go.
Okay. So one of the things I'm hearing are these amazing national programs that the federal government is going to come and implement. But the reality is everything that happens in cities, or 90% of what happens in cities, really is a municipal responsibility. So I think the key aspect is that we have to give cities the opportunity to invest in themselves. So, I always imagine that most of the NDP and Liberal policies have copied the Green Party policies that have been there for years, which is, invest in green buildings and all these national retrofit programs. That's been on our platform, I think, for the last 4 elections, and now it's on everybody else's platform. But what I see as the key issue is giving municipalities the opportunity to enforce guidelines on developers. That is the truest issue, is the developers really run roughshod over municipal planning at this stage. So the Green Party would like to work and with cities to give them more power, more taxation power, to be able to reinvest and actually implement these green infrastructure programs that will help people retrofit. And yes, obviously there is taxes that have to be given, or benefits that have to be given to people at a local level or household level to retrofit their buildings, but it's the cities that have to implement them. And so our idea is to work with the municipalities to see what works for them, because a municipality in Vancouver is going to be very different than a municipality here in Ottawa. And so we have to actually listen to them and hear what
Call time, Dave.
how they want to work things out. Thank you.
Great. And over to you, David Yeo.
Yeah, thanks again, Mike, for sure. As far as the PPC is concerned, first and foremost, we're the only nationalist party on the ballot. So that means we're putting Canada first. As you can see from my heritage, I hold this country near and dear to my heart. What happens right now is with the Paris Accord, we're very globalistic in thinking in that side of it. And there's a lot of money that's being spent outside of this country. And the PPC is looking at repatriating a lot of those funds back to Canada. We are only 2% of GDP. We're only 2% of the global climate problem. The real problem with the climate side of it is with China, United States of America, and India. They hold 98% of the cards for the issues that are happening right now. So in essence, what we will do is we'll pull those funds back from the global side of things. We'll still attend the meetings and still participate as value add. But in the end, once those monies come back to Canada, we're going to actually invest in innovation and technologies at the provincial and municipal level by rapidly decentralizing the government down to the provincial levels. I think that autonomy, and we the PPC think that autonomy at the provincial level is the best way to govern, have a smaller government. And I want to get back to your question about local buildings and that sort of thing. Absolutely. Once we repatriate a lot of that money and that funding, we'll innovate through the universities, we'll innovate through the colleges, we'll innovate through the industries that are affected the most. And I think that that's the opportunity for us to actually grow nationally. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. I'll just remind the audience, just if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. I've seen a couple of reminders for that. Thanks. So we'll move on to our second question. Managing solid waste is a large environmental concern and cost for communities across Canada. One idea to combat this problem is to give consumers the right to repair the things that they own, such as appliances or electronics, for example. In 2019, a private member's bill to establish a right to repair law was voted down in the Ontario legislature. If you were elected as an MP, how would you respond to a request to enact right to repair legislation? And the first person on this will be Yavar. Take it away, you have 90 seconds.
Certainly. So the NDP is really committed to strategically responding to consumer needs. So in the last round of Parliament, Bill C-28 was looking to expand consumer protection, particularly protection for consumers from toxins. The idea of enhancing, making more robust consumer protection is consistent with something that the NDP has been doing for over a decade in successive parliaments. We've been pushing for an environmental bill of rights. So as a lawyer and as a human rights specialist, I think that it's really important to look at legal measures where we can hold the government to account, and where we can create methods for legal solutions where consumers have rights in the area of protection, in the area of resurfacing, retrofitting, and basically allowing those mechanisms to fall to the individuals, also organizations as well, who can use environmental protection legislation for their benefit on a public interest basis, and also on an individual basis for consumers.
Great, thank you. Dave Stibbe, over to you.
Okay, well, that was a pretty complicated answer, but I'll just say that, planned obsolescence in our economy is one of the major issues that drives consumerism. And it is such a problem. And, even if we strike back to, my parents' generation where things were made to last, I still have an alarm clock upstairs that works quite fine. That's over 25 years old, yet I can't buy an Apple mouse now that doesn't last more than 3 years, which to me is astounding. So I'm 100% believe that the federal government needs to get involved in right to repair, and also needs to get involved in setting standards in terms of actual lifetimes of products, because product cycles have been purposely shortened over the years, so that even if you have the right to repair, the product is designed to fall apart anyways. And we can do better, and prices might go up a little bit, but as we all know that at the consumer level, people that create products are still fighting to keep their prices low, so they will adapt. Part of that issue too is the recyclability of products. Like, I cannot understand how we have not standardized product designs in things like bottles and cartons so that they can actually be recycled, and having a national deposit program. That is all part of the same process, and deposits have been proven to work to cause people to recycle, right? So these are all part of a bigger picture idea of how to attack consumerism so that we lower that, and then that lowers the impact on all these other environmental destructive elements like microplastics and electronic waste and all these things that we constantly have to talk about, because it's not just climate change that's the issue, it's the overall environmental degradation, right? There's so many different things happening, and we need to address that.
Great, thank you. So over to you now, David Yeo.
Yep, thanks again, Mike. Again, the PPC is the only nationalist party on the ballot. We are looking after Canadians first, our borders, and like I mentioned earlier, the repatriation of a lot of these funds, internationally, will help with innovation that relates to, these types of issues. Now, from the actual aspect of how we're going to govern, it's a very common sense governing for 2021. It's rapid decentralization of the government down to the provincial levels. The federal government should only be involved in major things like, airplanes, roads, borders and national policing and that sort of thing, and obviously budgetary aspects. But it's at a federal level. These kinds of concepts of the waste that happens at the consumer level is really a provincial aspect. So we would provide oversight, not overreach, which happens a lot today with the current government. There's a lot of overreach going on. We're looking at doing a lot more oversight. And so what we'll do is we'll end up working with the provinces on their plan, on their aspect of how we're going to actually handle a lot of these issues related to waste. And I'll give you one, for example, that's coming up very soon, and that is e-cars, electronic cars, the e-bikes and all that sort of thing. They're creating these massive heavy batteries that are full of these crazy, rare earth minerals that, we actually, from an Aboriginal side of it, are a little partial to. And it ends up that all of this waste is going to end up somewhere. So no question, the PPC government will actually work with oversight on the actual provinces, and we'll do a good job at it. Thanks.
Great. And lastly, over to you, Anita. You have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you very much for this question. And actually, the right to repair is right there in our Liberal platform. One of the things that is really challenging with this, of course, is patents. And so making sure that if you have an ability to repair some of these appliances, that you don't have companies that are using patent law in order to keep parts or keep the design so that people aren't able to repair. Another piece is the parts. And one of the pieces in our platform is to say that the companies that make things have to make available parts in order to be able to continue to repair them a number of years after these are sold. But the question really is about waste and about reusing. And one of the things in our platform is also about dealing with food waste. We know that Canadians throw out a lot of food, restaurants, and this is something we already began during COVID, and that's also a commitment in our platform. And also plastic waste. You know that we are on track to ban non-reusable plastics. We also have a plan so that we can make sure that plastics that are on the market are at least 50% recycled. But in addition, a lot of these ideas come from local communities. We're creating a $200 million fund that will allow local community groups to be able to do work in these areas, because I think some of the innovation and some of the ideas need to come from those local communities. But the idea here is that we want to reduce waste. We want to make sure that we are reusing and recycling, and the Liberal Party has been doing this and has the plan to continue.
Okay, thank you. Our third question this evening has to do with personal vehicles. So Canada stated that we'll ban the sale of fuel-burning cars and light-duty trucks by 2035. However, it's widely acknowledged that additional steps will be needed to meet this target, possibly including policies aimed at incentives, education, and infrastructure around electric vehicles, for example. What are your priorities to enable a transition to zero-emission personal vehicles? And start this one with Dave Stibbe.
Well, that's, electric is the dream, but it's not the only type of vehicle out there that could potentially pave the way to a carbon-free emission vehicular network. So we have to look at all options on the table, there's a few others out there. But if we're going to focus on electric, the first thing that really needs to happen is we have, and it's in the Green Party platform, is to create a national coast-to-coast, essentially electric recharging station grid. Right? When we started with gas vehicles, it's gas stations and roads that paved the way for that literally to happen. And that needs to be a priority, and it can't be haphazard. It can't be run provincially. It has to be a national program. It has to involve municipalities, and it has to involve provinces, and that would need to be a priority. The other one is we need to push that change really rapidly. We don't want to wait till 2035. We think 2030 is very doable. All major manufacturers are pursuing this full guns ahead towards electric vehicles. And I see us, the Green Party would be providing aggressive credits for people to make that transition. And really the only thing that keeps people not buying electric cars or hybrids is cost. If you equal the cost for what it costs to buy a gas-powered vehicle, people will switch literally overnight, and we can do that. And all it takes is a little bit of political backbone to offer those credits to make the purchase values equal. If you just made it simple, this car,
And I have to cut you off there, Dave.
Problem would be solved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dave. David Yeo, over to you. You have 90 seconds.
Yeah, thanks again, Mike. This is an interesting question, and it has to do with going from the industrial age to the information age to whatever age we're going to go to in the future. And one of the advocates said, the actual grid itself, right, has to be implemented. This is a big undertaking. It's a national undertaking, and it's definitely one that the PPC will look at. But what we can't have happening is people driving down the roads with Teslas and showing up at a charging station and it being actually charged by a diesel generator. This is just can't happen. And this is what's happening today, is that you're getting a diesel generator to actually charge up your electric car. Doesn't make any sense. So yes, absolutely. The PPC is 100% behind looking at a national situation of how do we actually build a grid like that that's efficient, but also the aspect of the waste side of it as well. Like we had talked about before, these cars are going to have thousands of pounds of batteries in them, and they're not going to last forever. So there has to be a plan in place. So there's a multitude of different aspects that are related to this particular problem space. We're going to look at it. Like I said, we're a nationalistic party that is going to look at what's best for Canadians, and what is good for Canadians is what's going to be good for the government. Again, rapid decentralization down to the provinces, and then working with the provinces on different solutions, both innovation through the universities, through the colleges, local industry, on how we actually put a plan in place to build a massive grid like this that is actually
eco-friendly. I have to cut you off there, Dave.
Thanks.
Mr. Fletcher, you're muted.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. Over to you, Anita.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to begin. I drive a hybrid. I drive a Prius C. I'd be interested to know what the other candidates drive. One of the things that we're already doing is $5,000 incentives for people who do want to buy hybrids or electric vehicles. But we have set targets. For 2030, 50% of new vehicles in Canada are going to be fully electric. And by 2035, all new vehicles being sold in Canada will be electric. And we're going beyond the personal vehicles. We have just got an agreement with the City of Ottawa with federal funding for electric buses. There will be 450 electric buses purchased for the City of Ottawa, which will make Ottawa the first city in Canada that will go fully electric. Also for government, we are making sure that all of the government fleet of vehicles are moving very quickly to electric vehicles. And one of the things that that was mentioned that I agree with my opponents is about the charging stations. We have a plan in our platform that we are going to make sure not only to create 50,000 new charging stations across Canada, but for those that live in buildings. We have a plan for existing buildings to be able to add charging stations. I've talked to many people who live in apartments who say that they would love to buy an electric vehicle, but they don't have anywhere that they can charge it. And so this is a way that we can make sure we're not just incentivizing and making it cheaper and easier for people to purchase, but also make sure that it becomes more convenient, and that those that are living in rental housing, not just in homes that have garages, are able to purchase electric vehicles. The other thing we're doing is—
Anita, I have to cut you off there.
Okay, there's so much we're doing.
Okay, thank you, Anita. And lastly, Yavar, you have 90 seconds.
Thanks, Mike. So I agree with a lot of the points that David Stibbe brought up, but I will slightly vary. I think the 2035 target for zero emission vehicles is certainly the target that we want to meet. And I think one of the things that the NDP promotes is realistic targets that are built on short-term deliverables. So we're talking about the Climate Accountability Office, which will help us be on track for that. So we're talking about 2035 is a great goal, but we need to know where we're going to be at various points along that trajectory. One of the things that's also been mentioned, and we're specifically alluded to, is the burden on families, on any income earners for making that purchase. So a $15,000 incentive for families to be able to make that purchase. But also we need to be funding the research and the excellence to be moving our economy in that direction. So we are also, as part of our plan, we promote a Center for Excellence in Research that will be focused on zero emission vehicles and making that transition. And finally, we want a made in Canada solution. So with that research component and with the funds that we'll be able to leverage from eliminating tax loopholes, we're going to put that research money where it can make a difference for families.
Great. Thanks, Yavar. So go to our fourth question now. The climate movement sees climate change as a social justice issue. Climate change and its effects, pandemics, pollution, natural disasters, crop failure, are not universally or uniformly felt. The people in communities suffering most are often disproportionately economically disadvantaged and often Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Climate change compounds existing structures of injustice, and those structures exacerbate climate change. Exhaustion, anger, hope, the effects of oppression and resistance are not unique to the climate movement. What is unique is that people who have been insulated from oppression are now waking up to the prospect of their own unlivable future. As an MP, what is your plan for Canada to support climate resilience for others on this planet who are facing the worst case scenarios? And we'll start with David Yeo on this one. You have 90 seconds, David.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Great question. Again, very quickly, we are a nationalist party and looking after Canadians first. I'll give you a prime example of that. The aspect of fresh water for our Indigenous people. Obviously, that I hold that near and dear to my heart. There is no question about it. I've been in Afghanistan. I am a decorated war veteran, and I have taken teams over there. And a part of our teams are provincial reconstruction teams. These reconstruction teams build houses, roads, hospitals, schools, and they also build, guess what? Fresh water, right? Why aren't we doing that here at home? So as a PPC government, one of my first mandates to do is to solve our own internal problems here in Canada of, for instance, the freshwater issue. And we would do that through the Defense Department. Our Corps of Engineers would move in and we would have these problems solved in pretty short order. Now, having said that, there's a lot of other pollution going on into our waterways and into our lakes, Lake Ontario, for example, Lake Erie, for example. I was a young man and I used to fish for salmon in Lake Ontario. I can't do that anymore. I wouldn't need it ever, right? So that's a big issue. So we have to tackle a lot of these in different varying capacities, but certainly, from a nationalistic perspective, we look after Canada first. And at that point, if there are other issues in other countries that we can help with, we'll certainly look at that from a PPC government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. And next, over to you, Anita.
Thank you. Many of you know that I've worked internationally. I worked with the United Nations Development Program in places like Bangladesh, where climate change is actually happening. You can see that all of the salt water has come in the Delta toward the farmers' fields, the cyclones. So I've seen it firsthand. And Canada has been leading internationally when it comes to assisting less developed countries with their climate action plans. We provided $2.365 billion. And in budget 2021, we've just committed to $5.3 billion over 5 years. We're also working with the G7 partners on mandatory climate-related financial disclosures to make sure that there's climate transparency. And these are things that we're doing internationally, but I also think that you see the discrepancies in the impact of climate change here in Canada as well. And we have created a program called the Indigenous Guardians Network. And what this does, we know Indigenous peoples have been stewards of the land long before the settlers got here. We're working with Indigenous communities to have Indigenous conservation areas and marine areas and to co-manage national parks. We're also right here in the riding, making sure that climate change is not indirectly impacting those who maybe can't afford to retrofit their homes by making sure that Ottawa community housing, Nepean housing, we've provided funding for those most vulnerable to be able to access that kind of retrofitting and climate to make sure that they're able to heat their homes. We know we're going to require the minister to look at all the policies from the perspective of those in socioeconomic groups that may, or racialized or Indigenous groups.
And I have to cut you off there, Anita.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And over to you, Yavar.
So one of the things that we've seen through the pandemic is how everything that we knew of the system, we've seen the cracks, we've seen the fissures in it, and people have been affected adversely. And within that, marginalized people, racialized people, Indigenous peoples have certainly felt that at a greater level. And you know, the impact of the environmental crisis has been really palpable for all of these groups. But one of the things we need to do is we need to have metrics on that. So the NDP proposes the Office of Environmental Justice to measure those impacts and to focus on those groups. We have an Indigenous guardianship program, which is going to put Indigenous peoples at the center of that response. And we're going to be looking at things that matter to the community, like the Trans-Canada Trail that runs through Ottawa West-Nepean, areas where people can actually focus on, enjoy nature within our own communities. We know in Ottawa West-Nepean of flooding, of weather events where the community has come together. And the responses, I think, can be macro in scale, but I think that also having a grassroots direct involvement in how we can invigorate ways in terms of bringing people back to the community. I'll give you a small example. In Britannia, in the winters, we need to bring immigrants more into the ways where they can use that area all year round.
Have to cut you off there, Yavar. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Dave, if you'd like to wrap up on this question, you have 90 seconds. Thanks.
Yeah, I fear almost nobody has really answered the true question, which is what are we going to do about climate change's impact on the poor and those marginalized people? Like, how does climate change impact people, right? It impacts people with disasters. It impacts people in terms of health and their ability to get fresh water. It impacts their ability to get fresh food and healthy food, because what happens when you have a climate disaster that impacts agricultural locally, we can't sell that food cheap and we have to go to the grocery stores and it becomes more expensive. And the Green Party really looks at through this lens, how are we going to help people? And I can tell you, you know, there's a lot of failure out there, especially in terms of Indigenous files. Like, you know, the fact that, you know, the Liberals have promised clean water in reserves for years, and yet we still have not provided that for all reserves across the country. That is also a climate change issue, and that is an issue that needs to be addressed. The other big one is there's still heavy subsidies of the most polluting industry in the universe in the tar sands by the Liberal government. So how can you say you're doing something really good for the environment when that is toxifying one of the largest freshwater systems in Alberta, right? And that, you know, is going to make it hard for even municipalities. And who suffers when fresh water is not fresh? Well, hunters that use that for their land, municipalities. Yes, the rich can go and buy water, but everybody else is drinking from a tap. So these are the bigger issues that need to be addressed. And this is where the Green Party really wants to focus on, you know, making sure these parts of our society are addressed in terms of climate change concerns, and having something in place like insurance for those people that can't afford it, and able to provide clean water and solid housing.
And I have to cut you off there, Dave.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'll go to our fifth question now, a little bit more of a local theme. Much of the land in rural and urban Ottawa is under federal control, and in some cases there's interest in it being developed. As an MP, what would you do to ensure that forests, species at risk, species at risk are protected, and ensure that any development respects our greenhouse gas reduction targets? And this question will start with Anita.
Thank you very much. And yes, absolutely. We are actually very fortunate in Ottawa that we do have a lot of green space. The National Capital Commission is something that many other cities are enviable of. But one of the things that I have done as your MP, and many of those here in the community know, that I've been holding the NCC to account to make sure that our conservation areas really are conservation, particularly Mud Lake. I've been able to bring officials from the NCC, including the CEO, to come and speak to local communities to hear their concerns about what happens when we start developing or turning things that are conservation areas into recreation, or start developing big infrastructure projects there. And that's something that I have a track record on. You'll recall that near the D&D campus, where there's a huge, nice green belt area just in our riding near Shirley's Bay. And for years, the wetlands there had actually eroded, and a lot of the water was actually gone. And what I was able to do is, working across with PSPC, with DND, with the NCC, we actually had one of the most successful projects of restoring those wetlands. 27 species have returned to that area, to the point where now we have to look at underpasses, and I'm working with them to try to find funding for that, for these species to be able to cross Moody Drive and Corkston Road. And this not only has returned species and biodiversity, but when we had that second 1 in 100-year flood, it was able to absorb the water. We're able to
I have to cut you off there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anita. So next, over to Yavar.
Thanks, Mike. So the issue of biodiversity and preserving biodiversity sort of goes hand in hand with the climate crisis generally. If we don't have biodiversity, it has all sorts of ecological effects, environmental effects, and we see it in our day-to-day. One of the comments that I noted earlier is that when we retreated in the pandemic back to our houses, we were working at home, we saw the benefits of nature. We were able to be in touch with it. And I think that those people living in different areas, different sectors of Ottawa West-Nepean have seen that, have been able to enjoy it to the extent that they could be out in nature. And that's something very important to preserve. The NDP wants to ensure the preservation of urban diversity, ecological biodiversity through the Species at Risk Act. We believe that the 2030 target of protecting 30% of our lands and fresh water rather is a viable target that we have to move towards. And we need to be a global leader in this area. So, sort of dovetailing on some of Anita's comments, I think that having community involved, directly involved in environmental movements and preservations that affect the community locally is very important, and understanding that intersection, the complex intersection between federal funding and how that impacts in a municipal setting is, I think, key to making that partnership work.
Great, thank you. Over to Dave Stibbe on this question.
Hi. So I have a love-hate relationship with the National Capital Commission. I love the space that they've provided for us, the green space. But the part that really disturbs me and is a federal responsibility is the National Capital Commission plays both developer and protects our green space. And you cannot do both. And I'm a firm believer that we need to put the National Capital Commission out of the business of protecting our green spaces and put them in the business of rehabilitating some of our infrastructure, such as the Prime Minister's residence and other buildings that are federal properties in town, and remove the green space from their purvey. I think the green space in Ottawa should absolutely be 100% protected, and it should be put into control of our national park system. That would remove all issues around developer versus, how can we fund our next budget to repair this building, and it sets clear boundaries. And in that circumstance, many of the same things that the NCC does good with will still be maintained by our national park system. We don't have to duplicate the ideas that the NCC seems to want to do, which is environment. They have their environmental policies, and our national parks has their environmental policies. It also reduces that layer of government that sits, so many layers of government in Ottawa, right? If you're trying to do something on national park property, it should be one layer. In fact, even running a special event in Hogsback,
And
right?
Dave, I have to cut you off there.
Yeah, so national park, that's what we need to do with our green belt.
Great.
And Gatineau
Thank you,
Park.
Dave. And last to David Yeo.
Yep, that's great. Thanks again, Mike. Yeah, it's a complicated question, but there's a fairly easy answer to it. And, I spoke with Keith Higley. He's our local councillor as well. And, I spoke to him on a number of different, aspects. And one of those was the aspect of him actually working with, the provincial government as well, and obviously the federal government on growing Ottawa. We have a big city, and it was, very much urban sprawl. And now we're allowing businesses locally downtown to be able to grow into 43 stories, a little higher. And that aspect, because the city has to grow, but we do not want, and the PPC does not support urban sprawl into those areas for sure. I think those areas need to be protected. There's no question. Parks Canada, NCC, I agree with Dave on the aspect of, working both sides of the track. That has to get sorted out. But, purely from, the federal government working with the provincial governments, working with the municipalities, and then again, working with our local, MPPs on the aspect of making sure that the tools are there for them to be able to grow the city in a way that still protects our environmental areas around the city, because Ottawa is a beautiful city with lots of green space. There's lots of bike paths. There's lots of areas where people can go out and roam around, and it's a beautiful city. But at the other side of it is that we have to enable them with the tools of efficiency rather than actually being mired in all of this detail
David,
that
I've gotta cut you off
is
there.
nest. Gotcha.
Great. Thank you, David. So I'll ask the last of, I'll take a pause after this prepared question and go to the audience, but this will be the last one for a little while of the prepared ones. Concern about climate change has generated interest in passenger rail as a mode of transportation as opposed to, say, aviation or using cars. In Europe, overnight trains are coming back into service. And the president of France has proposed that trips that can be covered in 2.5 hours or less by train no longer have airline service. As an MP, what policies would you consider for passenger rail service? And, oh, excuse me, do my moderator job. Yavar, this is your question first. You have 90 seconds.
So I think that we certainly lament in Canada the loss of the Greyhound bus system. I know in Ottawa it's something that I used quite a bit, and we need to compensate for that. The idea of having a public intercity bus system is something that the NDP champions. We need to expand rail services for those of you who have used rail within Ontario or across the country. It's great where it works, but in terms of the intersection, getting to areas that are off that corridor, looking at European models, looking at other places where the train system works like clockwork. I've been to other countries in the world. I have family in India, and you can set your watch by the train system there. We need to be able to build an infrastructure and have a public rail system that actually is worthwhile. If we had that kind of a system, the amount that we can save in terms of the pollution from air traffic and other things would be tremendous. And so I'm a firm believer in that, and that's something that the NDP is committed towards, creating that infrastructure. And
I have to cut you off there, Yavar.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Yavar. Dave, Stibbe, over to you on this question. You have 90 seconds.
So an integrated transit structure and transit plan is something that is absolutely necessary, even in Toronto, which, let's just compare it to Ottawa. Ottawa is building the LRT. It has a lot of federal support, but, there's no big plan to connect LRT to rail, right? And we don't need to go overboard and start building high-speed trains between major urban centers before we can create regional transit networks at the municipal level first. And that's where the support should go. I can't imagine if we were able to connect the rail transit system to connect places like Carleton Place, Renfrew, Pembroke, parts of Gatineau, all the way down to Shawville and east to Montebello even, so that we could actually have an integrated rail network system like the GO train system in Toronto. And then once that is in place, that's the first step, right? And that's a 10, 15-year plan. Then maybe we can start talking high-speed trains, because that's how Europe developed. They didn't go from zero to hero overnight. It made sense when it did. And that's where we need to focus it. And that's where the Green Party would focus on rail transit. And I do love mass transit. I think it is the future. It is how cities grow environmentally sound ways. And it's basically, it benefits those that need it the most, the poor and the middle class, because the rich will continue to drive no matter what. Thank you.
Great, thank you. David Yeo, over to you on this question.
Yeah, great, thanks, Mike. Yeah, the aspect of actual rail service between cities is paramount. You look at the urban areas of the European areas, there's no question that the ability to be able to go from country to country within hours is really, fundamental, and it's fundamental in their economic structure as well. So from our aspect, from the People's Party of Canada, certainly linking up, Toronto and Montreal as a corridor is paramount. Certainly linking up, Calgary in Edmonton, certainly linking up, aspects of the BC interior with Calgary is paramount. I mean, these are just naturally, natural ideas that we can pull together to put in place with current infrastructure that's already there. The aspect that Dave brought up is, as far as the GO trains and that sort of thing, absolutely agree with that. Our LRT is going well, and there's no question that it's going to be growing out, but there's that GO train service or that other service that allows the people of these other urban areas to be able to come into the city, potentially work. I know that people that are in Port Hope can absolutely take, the GO train to Union Station and work downtown in Toronto and be back out in an hour and a half. If you try and take a flight from Toronto to Ottawa, it still takes you an hour, but there's another hour on each side of that is actually used up. So it's an inefficient model. We definitely at the PPC support that from an interprovincial aspect. But again, we are a federal national party, and we look after the rapid decentralization down to the provinces, and we will absolutely provide oversight on all of this.
And
but
David, I have to cut you off there.
Great, thank you. And lastly, over to you, Anita. You have 90 seconds.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I don't know if people saw, but several months ago, through Budget 2021, we actually did do an announcement of high frequency rail between the Quebec-Windsor corridor. And that includes stops in Ottawa. That was an announcement we made quite several months ago. And that is vitally important. But what's also really important is making sure that people who are riding on the rail are healthy and safe. And that's why we have said that anybody riding on Via Rail or on any planes or trains has to be fully vaccinated. The other thing that our local caucus has been able to do is, for the first time, we were able to bring STO, which is the Gatineau transit system, and OC Transpo in a room together, and we were able to discuss and make sure that they were actually working together, because interprovincial transit is federal, and we need to make sure our transit systems between Ottawa and Gatineau are much more linked together. And also, of course, everybody knows that we have been providing funding for the phase 2 of the Ottawa LRT. But the other piece of it is that we've also been providing funding to the city for those links for active transportation to get to the LRT. So whether that is the segregated pathway for cyclists and for pedestrians over by Richmond Road toward Lincoln Heights, or whether it's different sidewalks or being able to have a bicycle space so that you can actually go onto the LRT, either park your bike or be able to go up the escalator. So the active
I have to cut you off there.
is very important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As I mentioned, I'll now ask a question from the audience. It's pretty short and sweet. In your party's plan, will you phase out fossil fuels right away? How long before they are banned? So, Dave, Stibbe, this question goes to you first.
Dave, you're on mute.
So phasing out fossil fuels is a pretty big ticket question, because that, you know, expands into all aspects of the economy. But I can tell you, we would right away eliminate all fossil fuel subsidies and transfer those subsidies to green economic concerns and research and investment. So that is the most important step that needs to be taken right away, because we're subsidizing an industry that should be taking care of itself, right? The other thing is, we would make fossil fuel industry pay for any of the destruction that they do to the natural environment. What's classic plan by most fossil fuel industries is they come in, they extract, and then the shell company goes bankrupt, and the taxpayer and the local communities, which are often indigenous, end up picking the tabs for rehabilitation. And the governments that have allowed them to this are long out of power, and their promises of doing something about that are obviously done so that they can actually pass those. So that will happen immediately under the Green Party.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Question now goes to David Yeo.
Yeah, this is a very important question. You know, the aspect of fossil fuels has been around for a long time. We had the aspect of, you know, whale oil back in the day, and then we transitioned to, you know, the fossil fuel that we have today. In order for us to be able to actually do that into a more efficient model, like electronic or like electricity or like solar or, you know, other alternative energies, this is going to take some time. Now, having said that, you know, our repatriation of billions of dollars for helping countries reduce their emissions through the Paris Accord would stop. We would bring those monies back to Canada, and we would work effectively with innovation, again, at the schools, universities, and colleges, along with the industries that are actually most affected by this concept, and like our partners in Alberta. But this is not a short transition. So the answer is absolutely the PPC is for providing, you know, this kind of oversight on ensuring that, you know, our fossil fuel technologies do grow into a more cleaner and more sustainable. But at the same time, looking at the evolution of innovation and technology at the academic level to ensure, and the entrepreneurialism levels to ensure that we actually have adequate capacity moving forward. You just can't turn off the switch. There has to be a plan, and the PPC will put that plan together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Over to you, Anita.
Yes, no, thank you for the question. We are not just working here in Canada to end fossil fuel subsidies, but we've been working with our G20 partners to have all the countries in the G20 do the same. The G20 has set a target of 2025. Canada is en route to be able to end all fossil fuel subsidies by 2023. So that's 2 years from now. We've already eliminated 8 major tax incentives for fossil fuels, and we are absolutely committed to making sure we eliminate all of them within the next 2 years. In addition, there's financing through things like Export Development Canada and other crown corporations for fossil fuels, and that's something that we are also phasing out. And what's interesting, though, is how fossil fuels are defined. I've noted that in the NDP will often say that something like the funding that we provided for orphan wells, or the funding we provide to be able to move from fossil fuels to clean energy, the wage subsidy, which helped workers in the energy industry. If there's a need for diesel in a northern Indigenous remote community, these are all lumped in and called fossil fuel subsidies. So I think we have to be very careful about how we define them. Anything that incentivizes using fossil fuels is going to be eliminated within 2 years. But most importantly, we've put over $100 billion into converting to clean technology and clean energy. And you can just look at Alberta, where I'm actually from Alberta. I worked in the oil industry for a short time, and a lot of the innovation is happening there. Geothermal, solar, wind. There's a lot of energy innovation happening. Thank you.
Thank you. And Yavar, last but not least, you have 90 seconds.
Thanks very much. So this is a key pillar of the NDP platform. I agree also with what some of my colleagues, David Stibbe said. We have to move away from fossil fuels for sure, but eliminating fossil fuel subsidies is where we need to start. The Trudeau government last year devoted $2 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels. We have, again, under the Trudeau Liberals, some of the weakest 2030 climate targets of any G7 countries. We've never met a single one of our emission reduction goals. That needs to stop. So I think that we need to have targets, we need to meet those targets, and we need to be on track to meet those. So I've talked about before the Climate Accountability Office, but one of the things that the NDP has done, even in the last sitting parliament, is that it's been sort of a voice of conscience in terms of trying to keep the Liberals on track to meeting short-term targets. So we need to, first, number one, we need to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. Again, as the Greens, I say we need to move away from the heavy emphasis on the extraction industry towards green jobs. So where the money, the $58 billion that these companies are making, needs to be actually put back into changing the trajectory of our economy.
Yavar, I have to cut you off there.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll go back to a prepared question. This one is about organic waste. Because organic waste disposal in landfills is responsible for the release of methane, a very powerful greenhouse gas, the province is looking at banning, actually allowing organic material to go into landfills. But given that emissions don't respect provincial boundaries or any boundaries at all, should there be some kind of legislation at the national level? And David Yeo, we start with you on this question.
Yeah, this is another issue. Waste in general is a big issue, whether it's organic waste or whether it's nuclear waste or whether it's any kind of other type of waste. It's a big issue, and how you deal with that is absolutely critical in ensuring that it's taken care of in a eco-friendly way. Obviously, citing the rivers and all of the other natural areas that are around a particular dump site. But second of all, we tried this about 15 years ago. I remember that we poured billions of dollars into the dump that's just outside of Ottawa, and the organic waste in that aspect. What do we have out of that? There isn't a whole lot. So from a People's Party of Canada perspective, there's no question, again, we would repatriate a lot of that funding that goes internationally to inside our borders, which makes sense from a Canadian perspective. We will work with innovation. We'll work with the companies that are, in this area the most, both from a nationalistic perspective and a provincial perspective, and obviously a municipal perspective here in Ottawa specifically. But to answer your question on organic waste, there is no question that aspect has to be taken care of in a manner that is not the way it is currently done. And so, from a People's Party perspective, that is also something we'll look at very closely and work with our partners at the provincial level and at the municipal level to ensure that the most efficient model is put together. Thank you.
Okay, Anita, over to you on this question. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. On methane emissions specifically, this is a topic that Canada has been leading at the G20 and at COP26 coming up to make sure that we are globally reducing methane emissions. Our platform includes a reduction of methane emissions by 75%, particularly methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. When we're looking at organic waste or waste generally, as you mentioned in the question, this is primarily done through provinces, but the federal government does have a tremendous interest in this, whether it's through the Species at Risk Act, whether it's through our navigable waters, fresh waters, interprovincial waters. One of the things we have in our platform is a national freshwater strategy of $1 billion to protect our lakes and our rivers. And that includes, of course, the Ottawa River. Waste management is something that we have also provided infrastructure funding to municipalities, including here in Ottawa. We provided funding several years ago for the waste management that goes into the Ottawa River. And so these are things that I believe we need to do more of in terms of interprovincial and also working with different levels of government, recognizing, of course, that much of this is at the provincial level. But more importantly, I think what we need to do as a federal government is show the leadership at the international level and nationally in reducing methane gas emissions, and also making sure that we are diverting as much waste as possible into recycling.
Anita, I have to cut you off there.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yavar, over to you.
Thanks. And so it's important that, you know, the question of methane emissions is something that needs to be contained. We need to think about that, but also think about it in the context of reducing carbon emissions generally. And so in our platform, we talk about the economic measures that we're using against the oil extraction industry, which is a huge concern. In terms of methane reduction, we want to meet the targets that are currently proposed for the 2025-2030 period. We want to engage in real-time monitoring, leakage detection, and we want to engage with the province to make sure that methane regulation is genuinely equivalent with the federal regulations that are in place. Additionally, in terms of landfills, the NDP will immediately ban single-use plastics, and will also be working to protect workers in the sector by supporting to the transition of renewable resources and products. So we're looking
to cut you off there.
Okay, and lastly, I'll go to Dave Stibbe on this question. You have 90 seconds.
Sure. So I'm going to try and answer the actual question, and that is whether we should ban organic waste at the municipal level and stop using organic waste dumps. I think that really doesn't really address, the biggest problems with methane emissions is not coming from organic waste. It comes from industrial pollutants from the oil and gas industry, which Anita talked about. It also comes from melting permafrost in our north, which is an overarching climate change issue, right? To make it difficult for municipal governments to actually stop, organic waste dumps, I think is a little ridiculous. It's a great initiative. What we have to do is work on the consumption of organic waste. And we also have to look at how we can maybe recycle some of the food that is constantly wasted and have it put into the system so that other people can use it before it goes bad. Those are municipal kind of small grassroots things that federal politicians can also work on. The other one is looking at our eating habits in general. We have to reduce our dependency on cattle and beef products, because guess what? I'll say it right out loud. Cow farts are far more of an issue than our organic waste coming from the municipalities. So if we stop eating as much meat in terms of beef, we are going to reduce emissions of methane significantly. So these are some of the ideas that need to put forward.
And Dave, I have to stop you there.
None of it's going to work if we don't stop climate change, because methane and the permafrost will destroy all of that.
Great. I'll go back to a question from the audience now. The background on it is during World War II, in order to meet military production and social needs of its population, Canada created 28 crown corporations. Within 2 years, Canada increased its production of aircraft 25-fold. Before the war, shipbuilders numbered at only 2,000, whereas at the end of the war, there were 30,000 shipbuilders. The message is, we Canadians can do this. Question, given the scaling up that's necessary to combat the climate crisis, how can the federal government create new institutions to get the job done, or leverage existing ones? Anita, this starts with you. You have 90 seconds.
Hey, thank you very much. And I think that where that question was going is really about how we make sure that we can mobilize everything that we have as a country behind making sure that we are addressing the targets and we're dealing with the environment. And that is something that this government has absolutely been doing. We are the first ones that have put a price on pollution and given the money back to Canadians through the Climate Action Incentive. I personally was working through my role as Parliamentary Secretary for National Defence with a number of people here in the community in listing climate change and the threat of climate change as a national security threat. Once this is a national security threat and it was recognized as such by the minister, that mobilizes that very same effort that I think the questioner was talking about in terms of making sure that not only here in Canada, but internationally, we are mobilizing to fight climate change. Some of the other things I don't know about institutions that we might be building, but what I do believe we need to do is we need to continue with a lot of the policies that we're putting in place. We need to keep on increasing those policies. So for instance, the price on pollution is going to continue increasing. We have a plan that has already been called the most credible and the most achievable and the boldest plan by third-party climate scientists and economists. And we need to make sure that we're continuing with that. And it is an all-of-government effort. Every
And I have to stop you there.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anita. So over to Yavar with this question now. You have 90 seconds.
Thanks, Michael. So I think that the broader question here is what is the role of government in rebuilding where we need to rebuild? So the climate crisis is one of the most pressing crises that are affecting us, but it intersects with social crises. It intersects with the way in which marginalized groups have already been affected. So when we talk about boiled water advisories that are happening in Niskandiga for over 25 years. These are emergencies, and we need to be responding to them forcefully, and we need to be responding to them and mobilizing the resources to be able to do it. So I agree with the question that the role of the government is key towards that, but we need to be building on all the areas in which we need to support social infrastructure, that is building our health programs, building our job programs. When we talk about building greenhouses, that's part of it. When we talk about preserving biodiversity through the Species at Risk Act, that's part of it. When we talk about incentives and protections of First Nations communities and mobilizing to protect those water protectors and land defenders, that's all part of it. But government plays a central role in this, and this is what the NDP has always done for over 60 years. It's invested in social programming, and by eliminating subsidies to fossil fuel producers, we're going to be putting that money into the programs that are going to protect our environment and protect people.
Great, thank you, Yavar. Dave, Stibbe, over to you with this question.
Yeah, so this is where authentic and believable, are the current governments really ever going to make that effort? When I look at promises that the Liberal government's making, and even the NDPs right now, they're looking at 2035 for achieving targets. And I truly believe that's 14 years in the future. My 16-year-old daughter will be 30, right? I will be well past retirement. So those promises are deferred so they can't be met, right? They don't have to be accountable to them. And that's the piece that upsets me. I agree. This is not a crisis. It is an emergency. It is like a climate war that we are actually going to be in. And people are not seeing this. And I really think we need to really rally the government and go all in. We have companies working in Canada on carbon capture technology. We should be funding them. We should be funding innovation. We can transfer our economy easily by investing in these. Countries like Germany and Denmark are leading the world and their economies, and everybody is benefiting from the research and the jobs being created through these green technologies. And it is bringing everybody up through that process. And we fail to see that here in the traditional model of government that we have. I think people need to understand, if you want change, you actually have to vote for a new party for a change. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking about this. I believe in 2035, nothing will be different if you don't vote a new party in with new ideas that actually treats the climate seriously. And I get viscerally upset because my students—
Dave, I have to cut you off there.
Palmitas.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. And David, over to you. You have 90 seconds.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Again, this is a very, very important question in relation to overall climate, situations. We have to put it into context first. Canada is a very small country. We're 35 million people. We have one of the largest land masses, and I think one of the cleanest land masses in the world. So when you look at the actual aspect of where we sit on the global stage, we're 2% of the actual problem. And again, I said that in my opening statements, and I'll say it again. It's China, it's India, it's the United States of America that are the 98% of the problem. Even if we went net zero tomorrow, not even 3035, even tomorrow, the entire country went net zero, we would still have a 98% problem in the world. So just think about that for a second. So in our aspect from the People's Party of Canada as a national party, we would repatriate a lot of that funding that goes into the Paris Accord and the support of that. We're not against sitting at the table and adding value and certainly sharing ideas, but we would repatriate that money back to Canada for innovation locally here in Canada that allows us to be able to take a look at all the aspects of that and actually put the technology to power from our own people into our own country within our own borders. Now, again, the aspect of us being only 2% of the problem and spending billions on this internationally doesn't make sense from a PPC perspective. We would rather bring that money back, lower your taxes, get rid of the carbon tax completely, and then actually lower everybody's taxes. And certainly from a PPC perspective, that's what we do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask our last prepared question now, and hopefully we can also get one more from the audience in before we wrap up this evening. As we work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings and make them more resilient to climate change, building codes are often discussed. National building codes, however, have not been particularly aggressive in terms of the measures proposed, and because provinces are at liberty to set the aspects of the codes they implement. As an MP, what aspects of building codes would you propose to change? And we're going to start with Yavar on this. Take it away.
Certainly. So one of our goals here for the NDP is to ensure that by 2025, every new building in Canada is built to be net zero. Energy and efficiency and sustainability practices is key to our platform generally. So again, when we talk about building 500,000 housing units in the next decade, those are going to be built with those specifications in mind. When we talk about retrofitting and creating whether existing or new housing units, those specifications will also be considered. The rising cost of energy, families see this in their day-to-day lives, with rental prices, with other day-to-day prices. Housing units themselves are just becoming unaffordable. So the issue of sustainability in terms of the environmental protections that we need to bring in at a national level also works hand in glove with the way in which we need to protect individuals and individual consumers to be able to enjoy a certain standard of living. So along with the ability—
Yavar, I have to cut you off there.
Great. Thanks, Yavar. Dave Stibbe, I wonder if you could go next on this. You have 90 seconds.
Absolutely. So when you're looking at national building codes versus provincial versus even municipal standards, there's really, if you want to simplify building, my brother-in-law is a developer, and really it comes down to really two really simple pieces that we have to work on that could easily be implemented at a national level, and that is insulation standards and window standards and door standards, right? Those three alone will solve probably 70% of the infrastructure issues in terms of reducing emissions, because with reducing the ability to keep heat inside your house and cold out, you are going to make a huge impact on that. And that is very easy to implement at a national level. The Canadian federal government has really taken a hands-off approach, leaving it to municipalities, but I believe that there's something that can be worked on, and it can be beneficial. It can be incentivized through discounts as opposed to federal handouts, right? And it would actually create jobs, because all these small companies that do the local installs are going to benefit greatly. So that's a way, as a federal politician, you can work on that file.
Great, thanks. And over to you, David, on this question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so from the People's Party of Canada, we believe in rapid decentralization of the government. The government is way too big. There is far too much overreach going on. I know that I've been out talking to thousands of people within our riding in the last 3 weeks, and I can tell you that they are dissatisfied with the amount of federal government overreach that's going on today. So from that aspect, we would definitely, decentralize this aspect down to the provinces. But again, providing oversight from a national building code, from a provincial building code, and from a municipal building code. I also believe, working with some of the permit advisors that I've talked to, it's somewhat archaic in getting these things, combined and put together, and allowing the actual process of development to happen in a timely and an efficient manner. So from a PPC perspective, we would rapidly decentralize this down to the local establishments that need to take care of it, but provide that oversight. And again, build in that efficiency model that allows the building codes to be updated and properly sustained in both from the national and provincial and municipal levels. But again, working with them to prevent or to put in place, efficient models of actual adjudication, so we can get this environment moving versus the stalemate that's happening today. Thank you.
Great. And last but not least, over to you, Anita. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. And I think the question was, what would we do as members of parliament in terms of the national building codes? And I will be very honest, that is not something that has come up very often in my role as an MP. You're correct. This is something that's normally looked at, not so much at the federal level. And this is one of the reasons, and this is one forum where we've been able to get this idea from constituents, but this is one of the reasons I hold an open weekly coffee hour. And now it's on Zoom. It used to be at Tim Hortons and Algonquin College, but it's almost exactly the same as this, except that everyone's on the screen and people can bring these kinds of ideas to me. We have to make sure, if we do act on this, that it has to be based on evidence and science, but this is exactly the kind of forum that I believe we can bring these kinds of ideas forward. With regard to housing and to retrofits, our government has put in $5,000 incentives and grants for people who do want to retrofit their homes. But the other thing we've done is a $40,000 loan system for people who want to do the really, really big retrofit changes. And that's something that we're putting into place already. I think we do have to do more, but in terms of building codes, this is something that certainly I will be taking up further. But I also encourage everybody here, since we're almost running out of time, to join my Friday Zoom calls. They're every Friday. I've held them more than 6 years. And these are the kinds of ideas that are discussed so that I can take those ideas.
And I have to stop you there, Anita.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks, Anita. So we're at the 90-minute mark, and I'd like to do a roundtable now of a minute each, just to summarize what you heard and discussed, and give some last remarks to the audience, and then I'll close our discussion. So, and that we'll start with you, Yavar. You have 60 seconds.
Thanks, Mike. When it comes to the environment in Canada, the good news is that we have the means to become a sustainable green economy. For residents of Ottawa West-Nepean, climate change presents a challenge and an opportunity. A vote for the NDP is a vote to meet that challenge and to take the opportunity. As you may have seen from our platform, the NDP will do this through a massive investment in building renewable energy capacity, creating 300,000 good green jobs, funding to retrofit every home in Canada by 2050, and investments in electric fare-free public transit. Against this plan are the vested interests of last century's technology. And as the world changes, the fossil fuel lobby and other heavy polluters want to decide on behalf of all Canadians that as other countries step into the future, we should stay stuck in the past. Now, the NDP's plan will put tools to fight climate change in the hands of Canadians. Now,
Yavar, I have to cut you off there.
Sorry, that was
Great.
90
Okay.
seconds? That was 90 seconds or a minute?
It was a minute.
It's a minute.
Okay. I thought it was 90 seconds.
Yep. Okay. Great. So over to you, Dave Stibbe. Dave, you're muted.
So I'm talking to people obviously here who are concerned about the environment. And we've all heard the tale of the canary in the coal mine being used as an early warning system. Well, to me, the canary is dead, right? The environment is truly and significantly collapsing, yet all our traditional parties seem to defer the implementation of significant environmental policies just far enough into the future that they can never be held accountable. And the Liberals' emissions are 21% above 1990 levels. Canada's never achieved a climate target. Greenhouse gases have risen every year since 2016. They bought a pipeline. How can we believe them? And if we just continue to vote the same way every single time, you know, I tell students this all the time. If you want to change something, you have to change your behaviors. So we need to start actually voting for a party that is going to do something about the environment. And we all know that the Green Party, this is at the core of our beliefs. So please vote for me in the next election. Please tell your friends that we actually have to make a change.
And Dave, I have to cut you off there.
As a politician. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Over to you, David. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, that's great. First and foremost, thanks for letting the People's Party of Canada and myself have this short period of time with you. No question that this is a valuable uptake for us to be able to share our information and our platforms with you. So the first thing is that obviously the People's Party of Canada is a nationalistic party. We look after Canada first, and we are looking to pull out of the Paris Accord and bring back those billions of dollars that are spent internationally to our national borders and invest in Canada. And one of the main reasons for that, again, is we're 2% of the problem. We're such a small country in the grand scheme of things. India, China, and the United States of America, absolutely at the UN level and other areas, bilaterally, we will take them to task and make sure that we hold them accountable for the 98%. If we go net zero again tomorrow, even, and the Liberals are talking about 30, 35, it's just not going to happen. If we go net zero tomorrow, we still have a 98% problem. So let's repatriate that money, put Canadians back to work,
David,
put innovation back to work, and then from there,
Great.
we'll have a good PPC party. Thank you.
And Anita, you have 1 minute to sum up.
Thank you. Climate change is real. I was here in our riding sandbagging alongside when we had 2 1-in-100-year floods. And we are the party that has the plan and has been exceeding the targets that we set and setting bigger targets. We are the ones that have put a price on pollution. We have legislated net zero by 2050 with 5-year incremental targets. And if you don't believe us, listen to Mark Jacquard. He's an independent climate modeler who ranked our plan 8 out of 10 and ranked the NDP's plan 2 out of 10, saying that it will cost more and be less effective. Or Andrew Weaver, the former BC Green Party leader, who said, and I quote, "It is the only credible plan put forward by any party at the federal level." Or even Thomas Mulcair, who called it absolutely marvelous. I truly believe that this is the issue our children and grandchildren will judge us on, and we will get the job done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Well, this brings us to the end of the discussion. As an impartial moderator, I want to thank all 4 of the participants for taking part in a very vigorous 4-way tie. And of course, I thank everybody who joined in on the Zoom call and was patient at the beginning as we worked, as so often happens in Zoom calls, to make the darn Zoom call actually do its job. I wish everybody good luck, vigorous discussion for the rest of the election, and as we can hope, very good outcomes and results that serve Canadians. And with that, say thanks again to all of you. Thanks again to the audience. Just ask the Zoom host hang on as we will do a small debrief as we close out. Thanks again, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Yes.
Miigwech. Thank you.